Okay. Hi, everybody. It's Professor Hartley here with her first ever taped lecture on Google Plus Hangouts. Okay, I want to start today. Our topic is documentary interviews, the pre-production and the production planning for that. And before we start, I want to give a little heads up on a couple of things that I want to point out in the frame here. First of all, obviously this isn't a formal interview. I'm interviewing myself, or I'm giving you information. So I've had to just make some quick things in the frame to point out to you, and I would not frame an interview like this, okay? So be sure you've done the readings in Clue, in the resource section of Clue that are on the syllabus, and it will talk more about specific compositional elements in framing your shots. But if you're the camera operator, you want to look through the viewfinder and alert your director to things that might need to be corrected before you roll camera. So for instance, here, you see my collar is kind of sticking up. You want to tell the director if the subject's collar is sticking up or if there's something else weird, and you want to have the director will then have the job of telling the interview subject that they need to adjust their collar. Generally, directors, you don't touch your subject. You ask them to make the adjustments. Sound people, if you're using a lav mic and you need the cable to go up through the clothing, you tell the interview subject, you ask them to run the wire up through so that you're not embarrassing them or causing them discomfort. So I've adjusted my collar. Another thing I want to point out in the frame that I left here specifically is this outlet here and the plug for my computer. If you're framing a shot, you want to look for things like that. Cables that are running that are related to your equipment, we tend to overlook those. They don't look good in a frame. So I would not frame this shot this way. I would either tighten it up so that there was less to see and we would cut that out. I would reframe it so I would move the interview subject, me in this case, so that you're not seeing that unsightly thing. So I've put Muriel's wedding poster behind me because it's related to film, and I thought that was appropriate for our classroom. Okay, so today I can, if you haven't downloaded the PowerPoint that goes with this lecture, you might want to do that now, and you can go in there and get that and then come back to me. So I'm showing you now the start of this PowerPoint, and I'll be coming in and out, but I will be sharing slides here and talking through my lecture materials. Okay, so 2 planning considerations as you get ready to do interviewing. Content and form. So content is what you are delivering to your audience through your documentary, the information and stories that you're telling or that you're having people tell. The form is how you are delivering that content, the framing of shots, the audio choices that are being made, lighting, all of the technical considerations in terms of how you are delivering that content. So, going to the next slide, you want to consider content before you start making form decisions. Okay? This comes from just kind of logic, okay? You want to think, what am I trying to convey to my audience? And that will help shape how you're going to do it. So you want to always think of your content first and then make very professional form decisions. Okay, so how do you decide who you're going to interview? So let's go to the research portion of our slides, okay? So I wanted to point out also that I'm using the module codes that I set up the first day of class. So we're using the little picture of the man working at the desk and blue text to talk about research. Back here I was using the little symbol that I'm using for media concepts and principles, and important terminology and concepts are in red. Okay, so when you want to find the right interview subject, you have to do some research. And so you're going to want to keep in mind the purpose of your documentary. Okay, I'm going to come out of screen share for a second here, and you can keep your slide up if you want. You want to keep in mind the purpose of your documentary. We set that up last week as to why it's important to know what the purpose of your doc is. And so you want to think, who is an expert on the topic that you're doing your documentary on? And always consider people who are considered non-traditional experts. And those are people who have lived through an event as opposed to people who have studied an event. So the documentary that I worked on with documentary director Tony Buba on African American steelworkers, it was really important to talk to the actual steelworkers and make sure that they got to tell their story. Yes, there were historians who also weighed in the film, but really the steelworkers lived it, and their expertise on it was so important to cover. So don't just think, oh, who's the prof in psych that I want to talk to on this? Think about people who may have had, if you're making a doc on, say, bipolar, you know, talk to people who have had the experience of having bipolar illness, as well as possibly a psychologist or somebody in the psych department. Okay. Also, who has something interesting or important to add to your topic? Those can be people that are that were peripherally involved or who have studied a very fine segment of the topic that you're covering. So you might want to consider additional people besides experts. And who will your target audience relate to and or listen to? So this is really important. If you're making a documentary that's targeted toward children, you know, a professor who's speaking very formally and officiously might not be the best interview subject, okay? So go to your next slide, and I'm going to do that too here just so I can keep up with what you're seeing. And we're going to continue to talk about the research that you need to do prior to actual tape interview. So I'm going back into screen share for a second here, and I apologize for my awkwardness here. I'm getting used to it. So when you want to do research on your interview subjects, experts usually have a bio that you can request, and those are the traditional experts who are professors or historians or whatever. Do a Google search on the person. There's a lot of information out there, even about us normal people, average everyday people, and you want to know if there's been anything, you know, kind of what their actual bio is saying or what their business is saying about them. But you also want to be alerted if they've ever been caught in a scandal or something like that, because you don't want to interview somebody that is going to embarrass your documentary. If the person's published books or articles, you want to read those, or at least read enough to know what they contain and to be able to talk knowledgeably with your interview subject. And if possible, okay, do a pre-interview, okay? And we're going to go to the next slide and look at what pre-interviews are all about. This is time-consuming. It takes a little bit more effort, but I have to tell you, it's usually worth it. Okay, so I'm back. Research in the pre-interview stage, you want to maybe take the time to go and talk to the person that you're going to interview. This gives you a chance to consider and kind of see where they work, where they live. You get to know the person. It's really important to understand filmmaking is a person-to-person activity, and if you're going to be interviewing something, you want to develop a rapport with them without the camera present, so they're more likely to be natural when the camera is present. So explain the project that you're making to them, ask what they know or how they might have been involved in that topic. As they're talking to you, get a sense of how they relate to you and how they move and how they speak. If somebody's all over the place, you have to think about that if you're going to shoot them and how you're going to frame it. You wouldn't want to go very close on someone like that because you'll miss those gestures, and all that motion on just a close-up head would seem kind of odd. So you're getting a sense of the person, you're getting a sense of the location that you've chosen to talk to them in. That location may or may not be where you choose to interview them, but if you think it is going to be, you want to take a moment to do a little bit of location scouting too. Okay, and what that can involve is bringing along a handy compass. This is a compass. And just after you've talked with them, before you leave, just say, could I take a little bit of a look around about where we'd like to place the chairs and the lights and the camera when we come back to shoot. And you use this little compass to find out the direction that all of the windows are facing, so you'll know where the natural light is coming from, no matter what time of day you're shooting. So maybe you're at the pre-interview site and you're talking to them and it's, 10 o'clock in the morning. You want to still do a little sketch of that location, marking the windows and what direction those windows face, so that later when you end up having to schedule that interview for 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you know where the light is going to be coming from, and that will help your director of photography know how to frame this or what to have on hand to make the lighting situation work for that. Okay, so you're getting a sense of the person, how they react to questioning. The pre-interview is not a rehearsal for the actual interview. Don't ask all the questions you're going to ask when you come to tape, because then they will have practiced. When you tape that, they'll sound kind of canned and not real spontaneous. Okay, so go to your next slide, and I'm actually going to follow along with you here. And it's now time to consider, should you give the interview subject a list of the questions that you will ask during taping? And should you make suggestions to the subject on what to wear? Okay, generally, I don't think it's a good idea to give them a list of the questions. Again, they'll practice. They won't be as spontaneous. There are celebrities who won't do an interview without a list of questions, and that I think I just read that about Kim Kardashian, actually. Why do I read that? Okay, so I wouldn't give them a list of the questions. You can give them kind of general areas that you're going to want to be asking them about, but don't give them the actual questions if you can help it. And then, should you make suggestions beforehand about what the interview subject should wear? And the answer is probably yes, okay? And I'm going to show you why. Going to the prop bin here. There are certain fabrics that do not look good on camera. They give you problems. And one of them is small stripes, or thin stripes, and small checks. You can see this is a small check fabric. And see the, here you're seeing the, I call it throbbing or strobing. I think the technical term is moiraying. Because the black and the white are so close together, the camera can't really handle the contrast, and so in very small stripes and checks, you get this unfortunate effect, and your audience tends to start watching the coat or the jacket the person is wearing rather than listening to what you want them to be listening to, which is your interview. So you do want to ask people not to wear stripes and not to wear small checks. Generally speaking, for exposure, mid-range colors like grays and lighter blues look pretty good. I happen to know that red works for me in terms of my hair color, so I specifically wore a red sweatshirt today. But you want to think about those things as you're working with your interview subjects. Okay. So okay, we're going to go to our next slide, and now, how do you develop interview questions? You develop interview questions obviously ahead of time. You want to remain flexible for follow-up on answers during the interview. You want to know as much as you can about the topic that you're interviewing the person about. You've done your pre-interview to find out information you need to make your documentary. You should have a pretty good idea of what the answer is going to be when you're taping and asking questions. Okay, it's possible they'll come up with something that surprises you, especially if they're recounting an event. They may have something that they had forgotten about until that moment. But generally speaking, you want to know what you're trying to evoke so that your documentary will be what you want it to be. So avoid yes and no questions. Generally, you want to start with easier questions and develop that rapport on camera with your subject and put him or her at ease. And then if there's some controversial questions, you get to those down the road. Okay, prioritize your questions, and this sort of works a little bit against what I just said, but you want to set them at ease, and then if you think, if you know you've got an hour to interview this person, you want to be sure you get to some of the most powerful questions you have before your hour is up. So you don't want to spend so much time getting a rapport established and kind of asking, you know, like, oh, how many kids do you have, and things like that. And then, you know, President Obama or Stephen Harper's people come in and say, I'm sorry, he has to be somewhere else, and they yank him, and you haven't gotten to what you really need for your project, okay? And put your questions in a logical order so that the person that is speaking to you can kind of get in a rhythm and get in a flow. If, on the other hand, you want to rattle them, you throw a question in when they're not expecting it. So kind of as you get more experience with this, and you know what the situation is and what you're trying to get at, you'll start to develop a sense and a real feel for when to ask which questions and how to do that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the form of an interview. Okay, and for this, you'll see I'm using the little symbol that we have for skills. You're going to develop some skills here, or at least the principles behind the skills you're going to be practicing in labs and in your projects. And this also brings creativity into the situation, and we always like that. Okay, so pre-production considerations. We've talked a little bit about location, but now you're getting serious. Okay, where will you conduct the interview? It's best if the location is connected visually to the interview subject. They are more comfortable that way. If you want them to be LEDs, then you know, you take some of these. Sometimes, this kind of drives me a little crazy, but you see it on TV a lot. Somebody is going to be recounting a car accident they were in where someone they love got killed, and the TV show takes them to that location where the accident happened and their friend died. That instantly puts the person ill at ease. It instantly ratchets up the emotion. To me, in a lot of those situations, it's kind of manipulative, but you can see it's a really great example of why it's done that way and why that location is chosen. So, you know, usually someone's home or someone's office is often where you do the interviewing. Okay, and you must decide at this point, before you actually start shooting, you're still in pre-production, do you want the person asking the questions to be seen or heard on screen? Okay, and you can go to your next slide now, and I may have gone through several slides here, so I hope you're keeping up. I'm supposed to say it, I think, each time go to the next slide, but because I haven't been doing that, I'm going to share the slide I'm working on, and we can all catch up together. Okay, so if you don't want your questions to be heard, you have to teach the interview subject how to include the question you've asked in his or her answer. So, an example. If you're asking the question, why did you want to set a new world record for eating Oreos? You say to the subject, okay, I'm going to ask why, you're working with them on set, why did you want to set up a new world record for eating Oreos? So you're talking to the subject, say, so you want to put my question into that answer that you're going to give. So you might say, I wanted to set the world record for eating Oreos to pursue my lifelong dream. Okay, imagine that you haven't taught them how to put the question into their answer, and instead you ask them the question, why did you want to set a new world record for eating Oreos? And the answer you get on tape is to pursue my lifelong dream. And now you go into the editing room and you have to figure out how to get that to make sense to your audience. So a lot of times I use a very simple example with interview subjects. I say, you know, we're going to need to cut out my voice and when I'm asking the questions, and so I'd like you to try to frame your answers by putting part of my question into the answer that you're going to give me. And the example I give them, I say, for instance, if I say, how long have you worked at the University of Windsor? You might say, I've worked at the University of Windsor for 20 years. And that's an example that they can grasp really quickly. Oftentimes you need to practice it a little bit with them and just give them some questions that you're not going to be asking them. Like, okay, so if I asked you your age, what would you say? And they might go, oh, 42. And then you go, okay, what about having to put it with my question? They go, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So I would say, oh, I am 42 years old. So you see how you kind of work with them a little bit before you roll camera, and it gets them comfortable. During the interview, you will have people who forget to do it, of course, and as you get more experience, you'll be able to edit as you're answering, as you're questioning and answering people, and you'll get a sense of, okay, I need that with the full question in there. And you might need to stop at that moment and say, okay, I need that. Can we redo that? And this time, remember to try to remember to put the question into that answer for me. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. And we'll talk for just a couple minutes about if you want the questions that you are asking to be heard in your final cut, you have to mic the interviewer, and you should shoot with a 2-camera setup to get the image of the interviewer as well. Remember, this adds time and work to your setup. Okay, so think about that. But if you don't think about these things and take care of them, you're setting up a situation in which you'll have to use intertitles in your final cut, which is when the black screen comes up and the question is there, and it says, you know, how long have you worked at the University of Windsor? And then you cut to people going 42 years, 83 years, 64 years. Honestly, I've seen that so much in student work, and it always cues me that they didn't think ahead of time about whether or not they would be heard on camera, and they also didn't think ahead of time about teaching the interview subject how to include the question in their answer. Also, you don't want to. The reason you're using a 2-camera setup now, and usually you wouldn't want to have to be doing that because it costs extra money to rent extra equipment when you're not in school. If you don't have the image of the person asking the questions, you're setting up a situation in editing where there's going to be a disembodied voice. Okay, so you're going to set up the situation that in your fine cut, this voice will come in from off screen, or you know, this voice that nobody who's watching the video has any sense of who they are. You're setting up a situation where this voice will just be there and there's no context for it. So really think about this ahead of time. Okay. So we're going on to the next slide, and these are still pre-production considerations, even though I'm now going to be talking about lighting, and that's because you don't want to wait until you get to the location and then work with your director of photography on what lighting you want to use, what style of lighting. So first and foremost, in an interview situation, you want this interview subject to be comfortable. And a lot of lights that we use in our business are very hot and very bright. And you don't want to have the person sitting there sweating the whole time. And you also don't want them squinting the whole time because the light is so strong and direct at them. So you want to think about that. The image must be lit to create a visually strong image. I get a lot of last-minute assignments where people have just gone, oh, I can see they're in the viewfinder. They look good. There's some light on them. Okay, there's an image. Let's go. Let's shoot it. And the image is kind of muddy. It's kind of gray. There's not any contrast. You don't want to be that person, okay? So you want to light, generally, if you're shooting indoors, you want to light the subject in some way. You can light for mood and emotion. There's a director of documentaries named Errol Morris who is famous for this, and he uses shadow, he uses colored gels, so that like he'll use a red gel behind on the lights behind somebody to create a sense of the danger they were in, or an immediacy to the situation that they were in. So you can think about doing that. And before I come out of the slides and we start talking about a little bit more of this, I say I don't recommend lighting to purposely make your subject appear villainous or menacing. Let what the person says and how they say it speak for them. Don't manipulate your audience by purposely kind of making somebody you think is a bad guy or who is unethical. You know, you make them look, you know, really scary or something like that. Personally, I don't recommend that. Okay, so now we're going to move into production things. I'm going to pop out here and come back and just let you see that I'm still here. Okay. And production considerations are things like where do you sit and where do, you know, in relationship to the subject. Okay, and things that you need to consider there, and I've got little slides here that I don't have to always be into the program, on screen here. I can look at it here. So where do you sit? Generally speaking, the first thing you have to think about when you think who's going to be asking the questions and where do they sit in relationship to the subject is you consider the eye line of your interview subject. And what that means is what is the direction that the interview subject's gaze will be going in the frame. Okay, so I'll just give you an example here. If during this whole interview, and I've actually been watching this as I've been doing it because I'm looking at myself, like it helps to talk to a person, my eye line is sort of down. If I look directly into where I know the camera on my Mac is, I have much more direct eye contact with you who are listening to me. Okay? These are the kind of things that you have to think about with your director of photography and camera operator when you're setting up where you're going to sit and ask the questions. Generally, you want the eye line of your interview subject to be slightly off the camera, the direct camera access. Like having somebody talk and looking into the camera the whole time can be a little weird and off-putting. So generally, you want the person looking a bit off, but not so far off that you're getting more of a profile here. Hopefully you learned in 112 that generally you don't want a straight-on shot and you don't want a full profile. They tend to flatten the image. You generally want a little bit more of the face, this kind of three-quarter thing, and to get that, you need to have your interviewer and your interview subject, that axis to be slightly off of the camera subject axis. Okay? How does the director cue the operator if the director thinks there should be a change in camera image size? Okay? This gets weird if you're the questioner, but generally you want to have some way of cueing your camera operator if you want to zoom in or zoom out. Camera operators and directors, think about how you're going to plan this. Usually you want to have any camera motion or any lens change, zooming in or zooming out, done while the person is asking the question, not during the time when the subject is on screen answering the question. Because that just, here you've got this really great answer coming and you're zooming in or zooming out, and your viewer later on is like paying more attention to why that camera is changing than to what is being said. So generally speaking, you don't want to zoom during an answer. You want to make camera changes during the question that is being asked. If you want to have cues, you can, generally you want them to be silent, okay? So the director might have a cue where they either hold up one finger, if they're doing the questioning, they hold up a finger to say zoom in while I'm asking this question. They might hold up two fingers to say zoom out while I'm asking this question. Okay, so you know you're interviewing and you know you're coming to a particular moment that you want to really have a close-up of this subject as they're answering it. You would cue your camera operator to maybe zoom in at that point. Okay, and so your camera operator is both looking through the viewfinder, but also having to keep an eye on you if you're doing the interview questioning. If there's a separate interviewer and the director is just standing next to or behind the camera operator, you can do a tap on the shoulder kind of thing, so the camera operator doesn't have to be looking away from the viewfinder. You can tap them once for zoom in and twice for zoom out, and you get a kind of a lingo going there. Okay. Last production consideration I'm going to raise for the camera work that you're doing is, do you zoom in during an emotional moment? And I just explained why zooming in or out during the talking of a subject, why that's just generally not what you want to do. We're so cued by narrative film where they usually do a zoom while an actor or actress is going through some kind of intense emotional moment, that we tend to think we should zoom in. And the director I worked with most, he had a firm policy: you don't zoom in, even if the person's bursting into tears or crying, because it does accentuate more the filmmaker than what is being said, and it's still going to be such a powerful moment of this person having this emotional experience. So think about that ahead of time. Okay, now I want us to go to our next slide, because I'm going to show you a little bit of kind of a quick and happy doc interview setup. Okay, so hopefully my slides will do this for me, but it seems to not want to go. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the doc interview set diagram shows the interview subject is between the two little boards there. Okay, so there's a foam core of black on one side and a foam core of white on the other. The interviewer, the person asking the question, is situated in relationship to the camera in a way that keeps the eye line of the subject appropriate for an interview. And you can see they're using one small light. I think it's a 650 or 600 watt. And the man that puts this up online and has this information says this is a way you can go into a location, do a very quick setup, not have to inconvenience somebody for a long period of time, and you still get a pretty nice image. So let's look at the next slide. This is a slide he put up of filmmaker George Kuchar that he interviewed, and he used the lighting setup that I just showed you to get this. Okay, and then he interviewed Armistead Maupin, and he did the same thing. And so what you're seeing here is, I'm going to go back to this image of the doc interview set diagram. The black foam core or black flag, whichever you use, it takes down the lighting on the one side of the face. So when you think about a three-point lighting setup of a key, a fill, and a backlight, this is helping you to take down the light and give you more of a fill side, and that gives you that nice, kind of shaping of the face where you can see that one side of this man is a little bit darker. That's the fill side. The key light side is the side that's the most lit, and so that's a very quick way to do to do a documentary lighting setup. And it also, that diagram shows you where the camera is placed in relationship to the filmmaker who's asking the questions. So even when I was setting this up, and I'm sitting in my office and I have windows facing me, I was very, very bright for a while. Now the clouds have come in. But you'll see over here, I taped up a piece of black poster paper, and I curved it a little bit using a box and a nice tape dispenser to, again, take down some of the light on this side of my face. I did bring in a wet piece of white poster board to use, white foam core to use over here if I needed it, but I ended up looking very washed out and a little bit too light. But I wanted to show you how quickly you can at least give some contour to a face by taking down the brightness on one side with a piece of black paper. Okay? Alrighty, so don't worry, this isn't going to go on forever. I'm going to now take us to interview composition. And I know for sure in 112, Tony taught you about close-ups, medium shots, and long shots and wide shots. For this, we're going to go to the next slide here, and we're going to look at interview composition. And the first up is, of course, a close-up. We love our close-ups. Remember when framing, okay? Again, camera operators, work with your directors, because directors have a lot going on in their minds, and she may need to be reminded, okay, of things. Even if you're going to shoot the entire interview in close-up, and normally you wouldn't want to because you want to be able to edit it, you should take an establishing shot that locates your interview subject in the surroundings, because you may have at some point a moment where you need to, you're introducing the person, there's a voiceover narrative or whatever, and you're saying, you know, M. Heather Hartley is an associate professor at the University of Windsor, and you have a wide establishing shot of me working at my computer or talking in a lecture hall, something that establishes your character. It's your interview subject is a character before you go into that close-up. So always, any location you go to in a documentary, be sure you get an establishing shot, okay? So this is from a documentary called Twist, and this man is telling about the making of music records and the performing of that song that he did. And so this is a standard actual close-up. It's very interesting because this is kind of a super close-up. A lot of times you include a little bit more of their shoulders and everything, but I do think that this is a great shot because you kind of see the practical light behind it as this nice warm glow. I think that those are record album covers. I can't say for sure. Again, that depth of field is tight enough that we're seeing very clearly the man and his eyes, the person who's talking to us, and the background is at the very least not offensive, and it's not drawing our eye away from the man who's talking. Let's go to the boss here, and this is from a documentary called, I think, 20 Feet from Stardom. And again, very kind of standard medium shot. He's clearly in some kind of music studio. Makes me think he might be in a home setting, a home studio, because you've got the plant on the one side, you've got the windows behind him, and most recording studios wouldn't have those features. So I'm thinking that it's sort of giving a personal touch at the same time that it's establishing the business that he's in. Okay, and again, just take a quick note here. The windows clearly aren't lighting him because they're behind him, but when they lit him, they used lighting to make the light come from the same side as the windows. It would be very weird to have had the key light hit him on the side of his face where it's darker when we're seeing actual windows on the other side. So they've lit it logically as though there are windows all along that side and he's being lit by those. And of course then they have the fill side that is darker. And again, take a look at the eye line here. And that it's a little bit down and off the camera subject axis. Same here. It's a little bit up though, and more direct, but off that camera subject axis, but not so far off that it's giving us a profile of these two men, which isn't as attractive on screen. Okay, let's look at a wide shot. I think this documentary, I'm forgetting the title right now, but it has to do with honey, and this is in Switzerland. And this man is a beekeeper. And I think it's just a rocking composition because he's kind of lounging in this field of flowers. And what he's saying at this point is how great the honey is that his bees produce because the air is so pure and there's not pollutants in the area. And this composition is clearly meant to really add to that idea for the audience. So you see kind of this very natural setting. You see, you know, the air is clear. He looks very relaxed, and it's just kind of an interesting composition because they've chosen to kind of have him lounging there with his walking stick. But that's again, keeping in mind the location and your subject, it was clearly a way that they felt he would be comfortable, and he felt comfortable. Okay, I'm going to stay in the PowerPoint thing, because the next thing we're going to look at is a little bit of that rule of thirds that you read about in your readings. Remember that you are dissecting the frame into 3 pieces vertically and 3 pieces horizontally. And so the camera operator is sort of imagining that, and you place the things that are of most importance and that you that are of most interest in the composition at the junction points of those lines. So in this particular case, I've superimposed a grid here, and you can see that his eyes are directly on the top line there, and his eyes, like right the very middle of his nose where his glasses, the glass bar is, that's right on the intersection of the horizontal and vertical line, and it keeps you kind of riveted to his eyes, which of course are the windows to the soul. So very standard close-up composition, keeping the subject on the one side, having them have enough lead room and looking room so that their eyes aren't right up against the frame edge, and that feels kind of awkward to people. Okay, let's take a look at Bruce here. Again, you can see the superimposition of the grid and how clearly it fits the rule of thirds. Also, when you do compose by the rule of thirds, it gives the viewer a chance to see the composition that's around that person. So whatever you've set up as the background, they get to see. Okay, and let's look at the beekeeper. And again, you can see how absolutely perfectly they've latched onto the rule of thirds. And his eyes are again at that top bar and very close to the intersection of the horizontal and the vertical line. And his body sort of scoops underneath that lower part of the frame. So that is the that is the rule of thirds demonstrated, and you want to always keep that in mind. When you do your interview taping exercise, assignment, which I'm going to be putting up on Clue, you're going to want to remember these things ahead of taping. Okay, so that's going to be the end of the lecture part, but before I let you go, I've posted composition analysis. It would normally have been a discussion that we did in class tomorrow, but because we won't be in class tomorrow, I'm going to have it be a discussion you do with yourself and send to me. So you will download the image that's titled the composition analysis that's in the folder we're working out of right now. And you'll write a short analysis of the composition using the terminology and concepts from this week's reading. And just a little hint, that doesn't just mean what I just went over with the rule of thirds. Okay, so it's the terminology and concepts from the readings. You'll write that. 1 or 2 paragraphs will do. Please don't give me 4 or 5 pages. It can be done much more quickly than that and much more succinctly than that. You're, again, working on your writing, too. And then upload that analysis to the assignment section of Clue by 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, September 16th. This is so that I know you've had this material before any of the labs start this week. Okay, the first lab is at 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, and I want to be sure that you've done the composition readings and you have a concept of all of those ideas that are in there before we teach you about cameras on Tuesday. Okay, well, I hope this hasn't been too boring. I hope it hasn't been too weird to watch me here in my office talking to you. And thank you so much. And I will see you at your labs this week. And over and out for now. Is that to Ryan's?